And let me get to sharing here. Okay. And then Mike, we have you on audio just fine. Mike Barney.
You're still on mute, Mike. Oh, there you go. It's
Mike, you're on the dreaded double mute.
Okay, so we're testing for Mike. And I'm sharing screen. 1 second.
Unmute my audio. Okay, it says I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
Wonderful.
Well,
and can you all see my screen?
Yes.
All
I see it here.
Okay, everyone, welcome back. This is Miyako Doi again. I have a fantastic presentation specific to rural cellular coverage. So our topic is a simple, low cost, and effective way to improve rural cellular coverage for public safety. So two great speakers. So Mike Barney is with the Mission Critical Solutions team here at the Firstnet program at AT&T. And he has tons of experience with technology, interoperability, broadband communication needs. He is an engineer and has a master's in Homeland Security. So he's been in this business for a while. And our guest today is Jared Den Heuvel. He's the Director of Public Safety Solutions at Texas DPS, and he manages the Public Safety Solutions Center. It consists of enterprise mobility management and emerging public safety technology research. So Jared will talk about how Texas DPS has used some of the solutions that Mike is going to talk about next. So Mike, I will hand off to you.
All right.
I'll turn your slides.
Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So the trick here is you have to mute it and then unmute it as opposed to just unmute it. So, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mike Barney with the Mission Critical Solutions team at AT&T in the Firstnet program. Very happy to be here. As Miyako said, I've got a fair amount of experience and gray hairs in developing and fielding solutions for state, local, as well as different federal agencies over some period of time. Now, Miyako, you did leave off also that I'm a proud grandfather, but no problems there. We got that in. So what we wanted to talk to you about today is something called mega range. In the last session, you heard that mentioned, and it is really an incredible capability that you can only find on Firstnet. Next slide, please. What is mega range? As was described, we're literally going to increase the power level from 200 milliwatts. That's the maximum allowed by law, 200 milliwatts for a device, whether it's iPhone like this or Android or even a router. It's 200 milliwatts. We can raise that power up on band 14 only on Firstnet up to 1.25 watts. What does that actually do for a customer? Well, it lets you get past challenging terrain. It lets you reach out to a further tower that you may not have been able to get to before. It can blast through forest and foliage where you may not quite have been able to get through in the summer, but you could get through when all the leaves were off the trees in the winter. So it gives you that extra punch. And if you have some RF background, you know that when I raise the power 4 to 6 times, I should greatly expand that range, typically on the order of double. Now there's a lot of technical things that go into making this work. It's not just raise the power and hope for the best. It's done very intelligently. Why is this only allowed on Firstnet? It's a very simple answer. Firstnet, band 14 in particular, is the only place where you can use the higher power level, because when Firstnet was started, all of the user devices had to have special filters put in them. If you're going to try to do this on a different band, you would have to go back, pull all of those units out of service, and provide new devices for that. So the fact that we were able to start with a clean slate, with a clean band, gives us the power to transmit this higher power level to punch through a lot of the obstacles that you may run into. And Jared's going to talk about that in a little bit. So the real basic part is when I raise the power, I generally can speak further to the tower. The tower is putting out 40 watts, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. So that 1.25 watt link from your device back to the tower really is the weak link. Oh, the good news is you can get mega range in both a mobile solution for your vehicle as well as for a fixed location. Next slide, please.
Actually, I need Miyako back. Hold on.
All right, well, I can share my screen if that helps. Let's see if this works. Can you see that?
No, and I was just going to say, Miyako, oh wait, here.
Okay. Am I back?
There you go. Nope, we're good now.
All right, Miyako, I have the con if that works for you.
You have the con?
The console, I'm in control.
Oh, got it. Okay, wonderful.
All right. Oh, the technology for doing this, as I mentioned, the basic idea is simple. The technology is actually very complex to do this in a way that doesn't interfere with other users. Oh, they created a new class called Power Class 1, which is the higher power, the 1.25 watts. And it does give you the greater capability as far as range. The other thing it does is on uplinks, typically, you can get a higher data rate up on the uplink from your device back to the tower. So it is a standards-based product. I want to make sure that's clear. This is not just something out of the air. This is not a booster either. Okay, a booster by law is limited to 50 milliwatts, 1/4 of what your cell phone is. So don't be confused if somebody says, well, I have a booster that can do the same thing. Mega range is not a booster. It is a full power amp that goes out to 1.25 watts, which a booster is not going to be able to achieve. What does that give you, particularly in the rural area? That's really what mega range was designed for. It's going to give you the absolute highest communications availability. Availability being the ability to connect and stay connected. Now, for first responders, that's extremely important. That gives you a more reliable connection and it gets you all the way out to that edge of the cell. Jared's going to talk about some places almost in the middle of nowhere where they were able to get coverage in places where there wasn't coverage before. So how does this do it? It's literally power density. Every radio receiver has a minimum signal that it can work with. So when I can transmit that stronger signal, as you can see up here in the top right graphic, I'm going to have a stronger signal or that's going to reach and be above that minimum signal for whatever the receiver is. Typically, it's the tower. We've got a lot of customers that are using this in EOCs that are in difficult positions, either in 4-foot concrete wall, building one layer below ground, in a place where there's just a lot of other foliage or buildings around, where mega range is able to get through where a standard cell phone may not operate. We've got users in hospitals doing this to ensure both primary and backup connectivity when they have any type of outage. For instance, they have a fiber line. They'll use this as a backup to ensure. Also, the other thing we've noticed is in very dense urban areas, mega range often can reach out, sometimes from an underground parking lot, one just below grade, you'll be able to reach out where you may not have been able to reach out before. So where connectivity is very, very important, mega range is a great solution there. And again, the primary focus in rural, very often it's far between the towers. There may be foliage or there may be other types of impediments as far as terrains. This gives you the ability to reach maybe not to that same tower, but to a tower that's further away that you've got line of sight. So that's one of the key points with mega range is it gives you the ability to have more towers as an option. That helps you overcome failed connections. It gives you increased connection speeds, particularly on the uplink side in normal areas. But the real bottom line, if you don't remember anything about the presentation, remember this. This is about coverage. This is not 5G speed. Oh, I can get a 5G speed up to a gigabit if I'm standing next to that tower. This is about being able to reach out potentially tens of miles to a tower where there is no other coverage. That's one of the things that's so important for public safety, particularly in rural areas. Now, the Coast Guard actually did some pretty interesting tests about 2 years ago. There's a really thick report on this, but the bottom line is this. They have a charter to help not only in U.S. territorial waters, but also in the waters just beyond that. There was a terrible diving accident about 5 years ago at about 20 miles out. The only comms they had was spotty comms with LMR radio. They asked us to take a mega range out, put it on top of one of their vessels. You can see it right up here. And we went out and ran it around the Channel Islands. We were able to consistently get coverage out to 25 miles. And again, this is at pretty good data rates, 14 megabits, 14.7, 15 megabits. Let me put this in perspective. That HD monitor that you have, whether it's watching TV or security cameras, is about a 5 megabit feed. So you're talking about being able to have multiple feeds at this rate. Now, why is this important to you? What this tells you is if I don't have trees or terrain or large buildings in the way, and you don't on the water, this gives you a very good idea of the potential of mega range. You really can reach out to 20 plus miles, as some of the testing has shown. Turns out the limiting factor here is actually curvature of the earth. But mega range does work at extended distances, and we hope that that's something that will be able to help you also. A couple of different options, as mentioned before. This is the modem. This modem is about this wide, about this thick, and about this deep, very small, about the size of a hamburger, somebody said. It works on all of the Firstnet and AT&T bands, okay? It works on all of them, but you only get the higher power on band 14. Some of that is because of physics. It works better on the band 14. Some of that is because band 14 was new and we were able to put that capability in without having to retrofit devices. So now, just very quickly here, there was a test done by Andy Siebold a year and a half ago, where he drove from the Phoenix area up into the mountains and back. And what he found was that without HPUE, high power user equipment, we call it mega range, the call was down for 33 of a 75-mile trip. When he did use mega range, it was only down for 12 miles of that 75-mile trip. So what does that really mean to you? It means, you may not get 100% coverage, but you're definitely going to have improved coverage in places where it was very tough before. Similar thing in upstate New York's with an ambulance service there, Bang's Ambulance. You can see on here the ovals. These are where they had holes before. You'll notice that the hole in the middle is virtually gone now. They've got coverage. So they went from this 35-mile trip of having about 20% of that, 7.4 miles of no coverage. And again, realize they're doing advanced life support and telemetry for those patients. They were able to shrink that down to a little over 1.5 miles. So the good news is mega range definitely can help you in areas where you have coverage impairments. So with that, let me turn it over to Jared van den Heuvel. Jared, just say over or next, and I'll flip the slides for you.
Okay, can you hear me okay, Mike?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so again, my name is Jared van den Heuvel, and I'm kind of like the cell phones guy for Texas Department of Public Safety, and I have been involved in the Firstnet project since fairly early days, several years ago. And so, as you can imagine, Texas is a large state. I'm sure a lot of you have can empathize with the challenges of coverage in some pretty remote areas. And so for us, the big priority, our big emphasis is not on 5G super speeds. It's about being able to continue to operate in the vast reaches of Texas that we are responsible for patrolling. And so we were very keen to test mega range as soon as it became available. And so I think we first started doing drive tests about a year and a half ago now. It was facilitated by Mr. Mike Barney here, so we're very grateful for that. And I will walk you through some of our drive tests, some of our insights that we've gained from it, and where we've seen the best traction in our agency fielding this equipment. Next slide, please. This is some of our initial drive testing. This actually is probably not that eye-popping or impressive. One thing we kind of learned early on during some of our drive tests is that, along the major highways and interstates in Texas, we're fortunate to have pretty good cell coverage. But similar to the previous graphics that Mike had shown, this particular area between San Angelo, Texas and Sterling City, you see a stretch where, particularly there at the top left, where you had a lot of little blue triangles that represent time out of service, out of coverage. So it was about 11 miles of no coverage versus 3 with the high power user equipment. And we thought, well, okay, this is all right, but we need to get a little bit more dramatic with our test driving so that we can make a more interesting presentation, quite frankly, and really test it at more extreme levels. So that's when we ended up going out to West Texas, further out to West Texas into the Big Bend area. So this is a little bit better of a representation. I don't know how many of you have been to this particular part of Texas, but there's hardly anybody that lives out here. There's a big national park down there at the south end over by Terlingua. And this particular stretch is pretty remote. I mean, you might be talking about one cell site somewhere near Marfa, and you might be talking about one near Terlingua, and really nothing else for about 83 miles. So on the left-hand side, once again, this was the standard AT&T Firstnet modem that we were running. And then on the right-hand side, you see the results with the mega range or HPUE modem. And so the difference was pretty stark there, about 128 miles of no coverage over the total drive distance versus 57 with the HPUE. Next slide, please. And then continuing on with our drive, Steve Nimitz from my team, who was gracious enough to do all this lonely driving, went from Fort Stockton down to Del Rio, Texas. And once again, this fairly rugged country as well as being somewhat remote. You see a difference of 60 miles of no coverage versus 14. So it's a nice insurance mechanism, for having coverage in a pretty wide variety of areas. Let's go next slide. So kind of once we went back, looked at the results, thought about our department and how we operate in the different kinds of units, we really came up with 2 main use cases that we thought would warrant further exploration and where people might embrace this technology. The first one is anybody who has a responsibility to operate over a pretty wide geography, including a lot of rural areas as part of that responsibility, could benefit from this. I mentioned before that it's kind of like a little layer of insurance to make sure that you have coverage, hopefully wherever you go or as close to wherever you go as possible. So, people that do statewide response in our case might be, people in sort of an emergency management role, some kind of communication managers. There's some specialized units that we have, like our SWAT teams and things like that might have a response area that could be really anywhere in the state. And so those types of units, particularly ones that are vehicle-borne or vehicle-centric, we recommended for deployment of these units. And really the first, some of the initial ones that we also got were highway patrol cruisers, like you see in the top left, working out in the Del Rio area, which is one of my snapshots there of the drive tests. And then another community that we figured could benefit from this technology would be anybody who has high uplink throughput needs. And that's something that a lot of people, they don't realize, the average consumer is a much bigger user of the downlink. You think, oh, they're watching YouTube videos, they're watching Netflix or whatever the thing is, and so they're a much bigger user of the downlink. And like Mike had said earlier, that power level from the actual handheld device to the tower is kind of the weak link. It doesn't have the power of an actual cell phone tower in terms of transmitting. And so that lower level of power equates to essentially a lower data rate. It just can't get the same kind of throughput. And you guys have all probably seen this if you've done a speed test. Almost certainly your downlink throughput's usually, 5 to 10 times what your uplink throughput might be. And so on public safety side, though, a lot of times that's in reverse, right? Because the first responder doesn't always need a ton of throughput to be, they're busy, their hands are busy, they're operating on someone, they're operating a vehicle or whatever it is. A lot of times the critical data needs to go up. That might be, in our case, drone video was a major one that we saw a need for, where that uplink throughput was acting as a choke point. And so we needed to have a better, insurance against having adequate throughput to get video back to headquarters so that certain decisions could be made, or to an operations center, an emergency operations center, whatever the case may be. And that's probably been our most active community, has been our UAS operators. And pretty quickly, that started to morph into the need for something that's a little bit more portable and not as bolted into a vehicle. And so we ended up being one of the first folks, I think, to test this Pelican case mounted version of Mega Range. And I think what it boils down to is that, only maybe a fraction of 1% of people really understand how RF works, or even what RF stands for. And so a lot of, Mike's technical explanations, it flies over a lot of people's heads. And certainly in our community, we got to just give them something that's pretty simple, 1 or 2 buttons max, it fits in a box so they can't break it, and, hopefully not be damaged by environmental factors. And when you're doing just a cellular solution like this, it's relatively affordable. When you start talking about satellite packages and things like that, either the plan gets expensive or the actual upfront equipment cost is expensive. So for us, this was kind of that perfect price point where we could get these things fairly cheaply and fairly officer-proof to deploy them. And so we've seen a lot of traction in these kind of deployable kits that people can either use in their vehicle or, to carry with them to where they need to operate, set up a drone and get to work. And I think, let's go next slide. I don't think I have any more slides, Mike. That was my main thing. So I'm really all about questions. If there are any, I'd be happy to help, articulate what we've seen from our end. But it's been a pretty popular tool. It's a little niche and sometimes hard to explain to people. But for us, it's proven itself, and I would estimate we've probably bought, I don't know, at least 50, 60 units to this point in varying configurations.
Thanks, Jared. Miyako, back to you.
Okay, we do have a question. Thanks, guys. We do have a question in the chat from Lynn Nelson. Is Mega Range something that can be requested in a more permanent fashion, not incidents or planned events? So just for context, Fred and Ryan were on earlier talking about ROG and how those assets are requested. So this one's specific to Mega Range. And it continues, it requires equipment installation in fixed or mobile structures, correct? Or can it increase the ability to use FirstNet enabled devices, such as cellular phones that would normally not have coverage? So the first part of it is Mega Range something that can be requested in a more permanent fashion?
Yes, it is. Both fixed locations as well as mobile. Jared showed you quite a few mobile. Real quick, when COVID started hitting, one of the things that we found out in working with our partners in New York City was that many of the buildings where they had the COVID centers for testing as well as vaccines